He lent huge amounts of money to garment manufacturers, desperate to meet commitments to their buyers. When the owners couldn't repay the loan, Lucchese settled for a piece of the business. To the outside world, he was a very successful dressmaker.
He controlled one of the big dress companies there, and at the same time shook down all the others. They were taking like 30, 40 grand a year for him to stay in business.
The real money, of course, was in the rackets Lucchese had come to learn so well. Along with loan sharking, the Lucchese family ran another traditional big money maker, gambling. It was a time-honored business for gangsters, Italian, Jewish, or other.
But Bugsy Siegel would walk down the street, and what first attracted him was gambling. There were gambling games out on the street, crap games. People rolling dice up against a brick wall. And he'd look down and be piles of money laying around, people betting money.
They can set up dice rooms, and it may not sound like much, but when you have 6 dice rooms going 24 hours a day with high rollers, you're taking in thousands and thousands of dollars an hour.
The mob didn't always agree on business. One of the rackets that caused the greatest dissent was heroin dealing. Tommy Lucchese opposed drug trafficking as it left the family too exposed to scrutiny on the streets. Others, unable to ignore the enormous profits, embraced it. All took their share of the profits from the illegal trade.
Lucchese got his cut, you know. He kept away from it, but he expected his cut.
By the 1930s, the mob was looking for new industries to corrupt. Their most profitable enterprise, bootlegging, dried up with the repeal of Prohibition. Partnering again with Jewish gangsters, Lucchese found a new source of revenue in New York's multi-million-dollar kosher chicken industry. He gained control of one of the key unions, set prices, and made sure the mob got a piece of the profits. He repeated this highly successful formula in other industries.
At another point, they took control of a union which represented candy workers, people who manufacture candy. And as a result, the price of candy went up rather sharply. So millions of American children were paying a small mafia tax every time they bought a little bar of candy.
When the mob was in a particular industry, they exerted the kind of influence or domination or control which meant that individual business owners within that industry really had very little choice on how they were to operate. And that was devastating for economic freedom, for costs, and for the way society ought to be run.
Full of unions and industry infiltration that became the Lucchese hallmark and made this crime family one of the richest and most successful. While organized criminal groups have always made money with such favors as gambling, prostitution, and extortion, it was mostly after Prohibition that the mob began looking for new rackets to exploit. Tommy Lucchese's outfit was particularly adept at coming up with lucrative new schemes to bring in piles of cash.
They were involved primarily in crimes such as murder, loan sharking, gambling, labor racketeering, obstruction of justice, political corruption. You name it, the Lucchese family was involved in every aspect of New York's economic system.
Lucchese learned that the secret to a successful industry racket is to seize control of a key union, then put the squeeze on the business owners. This tactic was especially effective in the garment and construction trades.
In the case of the garment center, organized crime, Lucchese family specifically discovered that there's one key to trucking. That's Teamsters Union. There's one Teamsters Union local which represents virtually all the truck drivers in the garment center. Now, if you take control of that local, as they did, now you've got power. Why is it power? Because if the Teamsters Union suddenly goes on strike, nothing moves.
The same was true in construction. As an assistant U.S. attorney, Michael Chertoff learned how the mob operated.
They had the ability through the labor unions to stop a job, to delay a job, to make sure that the concrete was delivered in a manner that would be disruptive to the progress of the job. And they knew that by creating these kinds of problems, they could cost the companies millions of dollars.
Now, we're talking here about hundreds of millions of dollars. We're talking about four families primarily: the Colombo family, the Genovese family, the Gambino family, and the Lucchese family. But the bosses of these four families had 6 general contractors, 6 construction companies that only these companies were allowed to bid on major projects in New York City. For every job that was over $2 million, the contractor that got the contract had to kick back to the families 2%.
The Lucchese leaders took the construction racket a step further than the other families.
The Lucchese family had one little specialty that everybody had overlooked, but they found it. They realized something, which is that if you're making construction-grade concrete, you need stone. Now, it turns out, they discovered, that almost all the stone comes from quarries in Connecticut. Well, they ship it by water, and it comes into Long Island. But there's only one port in Long Island that handles it and then processes it for construction purposes. Perfect scenario. They got control of the stone business.
The Luccheses also monopolized another small but vital union.
The Lucchese family got control of the plasterers union. It's a small little union. Most people don't even know about it. And it was a union that represented the guys who go in with new construction. They go in and they have the little hods and the plaster. And they plaster up all the walls before the painters come in. Seems like a simple little thing, right? It's a lot of money.
At its peak, this conspiracy, this enterprise, dominating construction, in effect imposed a tax on every resident of the city of New York, certainly in Manhattan, because there were millions of dollars in excess costs that were built into construction that were designed to produce money to be paid to mobsters. And so every single tenant, every single condo owner, everybody who lived in Manhattan was paying something that was eventually making its way to the mob.
The Luccheses lent new meaning to the old saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure. They gained control of the carting industry and hauled in millions.
The World Trade Center at one point, their garbage bill was $1.1 million a year. That's a lot of garbage, but not $1 million worth of garbage. What could the World Trade Center do? They found out there was only one garbage hauler which would pick up their garbage.
After World War II, Tommy Lucchese infiltrated the garbage hauling industry in the suburbs.
The carting industry on Long Island was an interesting industry. There was a trade association made up of the owners of the businesses. There was the union, which was controlled by the Gambino crime family, and then there were dump sites that were controlled by a variety of other individuals and entities. The Lucchese crime family was able to monopolize the industry and not just influence it, not just dominate it, but control it.
The Lucchese family also used the unions to profit from everything going in and out of New York's Kennedy Airport.
JFK Airport, if you look at the airport, it's very easily to see at the cargo aspect of it, tremendous amount of freight going through the airport. And the obvious priority for this freight is to be delivered in a timely fashion. How it gets delivered is by union carry. So it just follows suit that the LCN saw a wonderful opportunity by controlling the local union.
Some business owners rebelled against the mob, but found themselves fighting a dangerous battle.
There was always the threat of violence. You know, we had tapes where mobsters would sit with contractors and tell them stories about people who had disappeared or people who had gotten beaten. And all this was designed to send the message that it could happen to you.
So let me get this straight. You guys want me to go with your carting company, even though it'll cost me 3 times as much as I was paying at my old location?
That would be the smart thing to do.
What if I say no? What if I don't want to use you guys? You can't force it.
Hey, it's a free country, pal. We ain't gonna make you do nothing you don't want to do.
That's right. This is a business decision that you've got to make. You familiar with Alden Supply Company?
Yeah, they're across the street.
That's right. Ken Strauss, the owner. What's he been missing for about a month now? One day he just didn't come home from work.
The problem was that Kenny made some bad business decisions.
They divvied up private businesses such as the carting business or concrete business for themselves. They ran their businesses contrary to the American way. They ran it their way. They enforced their control over businesses and industries through fear.
For over 3 decades, Tommy Lucchese ran his criminal empire to great success without getting knocked off or imprisoned. He also successfully kept his personal family well insulated from his mafia family. He died of natural causes, and after his death, his surviving relatives actually changed the spelling on his tombstone to keep outsiders away. Before he died, Lucchese had one last bit of underworld business to tend to, picking a successor to run the organization. His choice, with approval by the commission, was a protege from the old neighborhood in East Harlem, Anthony Corallo. Even more than his predecessor and mentor, Anthony Corallo's background was pure hoodlum, as former prosecutor Ronald Goldstock learned.
Corallo was an individual who came up through the family, through violence. People understood that. People were afraid of him. He was a person that was respected, and so for him to head the family was not surprising.
There was only one thing standing in the way of a smooth transition of power. Corallo was heading to a prison sentence on a bribery conviction, an unusual event for the mobster nicknamed Tony Ducks for his ability to duck the law.
Corallo was a person who believed in murder as a means of accomplishing their ends. He was an individual who grew up understanding what power meant and physical violence could do, and he practiced that from the time that he began criminal activities through his years as a labor racketeer into controlling the family.
Corallo began his mafia career in the Lucchese family stronghold, the Garment District. By the 1950s, he was one of the biggest labor racketeers in the country. He and an associate allegedly put into power the most infamous union boss of all time, James Hoffa.
It is a complex area, and a lot of traditional organized crime groups really didn't know how to exploit it. Tony Ducks Corallo, Johnny Diaguardi did. Johnny Dio was the individual who created the paper locals in the Teamsters Union, which enabled Jimmy Hoffa to become the president. Tony Ducks Corallo played a menacing role within the area of labor racketeering.
Former FBI agent Jules Bonavolante was also familiar with Corallo.
I think if you go back to the McClellan hearings years ago, Senator McClellan himself said that Tony Ducks Corallo was one of the worst racketeers he'd ever seen. In fact, he said that either he or Robert Kennedy stated that Corallo had helped Jimmy Hoffa gain control of the union in New York.
The authorities were unable to prove Corallo's role in labor corruption. Instead, when he was convicted in the 60s, it was for bribery. The brief jail sentence only delayed Corallo's appointment as boss. The commission named an interim head, Carmine Tremonti, to run the family while Corallo served his time. After 23 months, Tony Ducks was out, assuming his position at the top of the Lucchese Crime Family. Under Corallo's reign as boss, the Lucchese family expanded operations in New York's Long Island. Corallo continued the family takeover of the suburban construction and garbage hauling industries, and appointed Sal Avellino as the family's point person in sanitation.
Well, Avellino's family had been in the Lucchese Crime Family. His father had been a soldier in the family. His father had interest in the carting industry. He took them over, and he was a